She was just a night nurse, a ghost in blue scrubs navigating the hushed, sterile corridors of St. Jude's Metropolitan Hospital. He was Dr. Alistair Finch, the chief of surgery, a man whose immaculate suits and polished shoes were a form of armor, a man who believed he was a god within these bleached walls. But when a critically wounded warrior, a shadow from a world of sand and steel, refused every surgeon and every scalpel, she would speak a single, impossible phrase. A phrase from a life she had buried, a phrase that would ignite a fuse leading directly to the heart of a corrupt empire and bring it all crashing down. Now, let me take you inside the longest night at St. Jude's, where the battle for a man's life became a war for the soul of an institution. Alara Vance felt the hospital breathe around her. It was a shallow, mechanical respiration. The soft whoosh of ventilators in the ICU, the distant rhythmic beep of a dozen heart monitors, creating a kind of technological symphony. The air tasted of antiseptic, stale coffee, and the faint, cloying sweetness of wilting get-well flowers. It was a scent she knew better than any perfume. For 3 years, this had been her world, a predictable landscape of polished linoleum floors and fluorescent lights that hummed with a maddening consistency. She was good at her job, more than good. She was precise, efficient, and preternaturally calm. Her movements were economical, her observations sharp. She could read the subtle story told by a patient's pallor, the slight tremor in a hand, the almost imperceptible catch in a breath. These were the signals that mattered, the silent alarms that often preceded the shrieking of a machine. Other nurses were a flurry of motion, a clatter of equipment, and hurried whispers. Alara was a point of stillness in the chaos, a quiet anchor in the nightly storm of human suffering. Her colleagues respected her competence, but they didn't understand her silence. They mistook her stillness for timidity, her quiet nature for a lack of ambition. They saw a competent night nurse, nothing more. They didn't see the coiled tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes were always moving, assessing, cataloging threats. They didn't see the woman who had once set a broken femur with 2 sticks and a strip of parachute cord under a sky lit by enemy fire. They saw Nurse Vance, the reliable, quiet one, and that was exactly how she wanted it. The past was a locked room, and she kept the key buried deep. Tonight, the air was different. It was heavier, charged with an unspoken tension that had nothing to do with the usual emergencies. It radiated from one man, Dr. Alistair Finch. He was doing a late-night walkthrough, something he rarely did unless he was looking for a target. Finch didn't just run the surgical department, he reigned over it. He was a man carved from arrogance and ambition, with a smile that never reached his cold, calculating eyes. He moved through the halls like a predator, his expensive Italian shoes making no sound on the floor, his presence announced only by the sudden stiffening of every spine in his vicinity. Alara was in the middle of her rounds, checking the chart for a post-op patient in room 304 when he materialized beside her. The scent of his cologne, a sharp, citrusy fragrance that cost more than her weekly grocery bill, arrived a second before he did. "Nurse Vance," he said. His voice was smooth as expensive whiskey, but it carried an edge that could strip paint. She didn't startle. She had learned long ago not to show any reaction. She turned slowly, her face a mask of professional neutrality. "Dr. Finch?" He didn't look at her. His eyes were on the chart in her hand. He plucked it from her grasp with a casual disdain that was more insulting than a slap. His manicured fingers scanned the page, his lips curled into a faint sneer. "Mr. Abernathy's potassium is slightly elevated. I see you've noted it." "Yes, doctor. Dr. Evans is aware. He's waiting for the follow-up labs before adjusting the IV drip." Finch made a small, dismissive sound in the back of his throat. "Dr. Evans is a resident, a child playing with a chemistry set. I expect my nurses to be more proactive. You should have anticipated his order and prepared the new solution. Every minute of delay is a strain on a recovering heart." It was a ridiculous assertion. Preparing a medication without a direct order was a fireable offense, a cardinal sin of nursing. He knew that. She knew that. But this wasn't about proper procedure. This was a power play. This was about reminding her and everyone else within earshot of their place in his kingdom. "My responsibility is to execute a doctor's orders, sir, not to preempt them," she said, her voice perfectly level. betraying none of the cold fury beginning to uncoil in her gut. Finch finally looked at her. His eyes were the color of a winter sky and just as cold. He smiled, a thin, predatory slash. And that, Nurse Vance, is why you will always be a night nurse. You lack initiative. You follow. You do not lead. He tapped the chart against her chest, forcing her to take it back. See to it that Dr. Evans is reminded of the urgency. He turned and walked away, a king leaving his court, leaving a trail of humiliation and fear in his wake. The other nurses at the station suddenly found their shoes fascinating. No one met her eyes. In Finch's world, his displeasure was a contagious disease, and no one wanted to be infected by proximity. Alara stood there for a long moment, the plastic chart cool against her fingers. The humiliation was a bitter metallic taste in her mouth. It was a familiar feeling, not just from the hospital, but from a lifetime of being underestimated. She drew in a slow, controlled breath, the way she'd been taught. In through the nose for 4, hold for 4, out through the mouth for 6, the box breathing. It centered her, pushed the anger down into a cold, hard knot in her stomach. He saw a follower. He had no idea what she was capable of leading. He had no idea of the men she had led, men who would have walked through fire for her, whose lives she had held in her hands in places that made this sterile, brightly lit hallway look like a child's nursery. Not a hero, not a witness, just a ghost in scrubs doing her job. She finished her rounds, her movements as precise and unhurried as ever, but inside, the cold knot of anger was beginning to burn. Finch's casual cruelty was a symptom of a deeper sickness, a rot that permeated the hospital's administration. It was all about power, about status, about billing codes and profit margins. The patients, the very reason for the hospital's existence, often felt like an afterthought. An hour later, the night's manufactured tension was shattered by a genuine crisis. The call came from the ER director, his voice tight with stress. A Priority 1 transfer was inbound via helicopter, AVIP. John Doe, severe trauma, multiple GSWs, polytrauma. The patient was military, active duty. The entire surgical wing was to be cleared. A new energy surged through the hospital. It was the electric hum of controlled chaos. Security guards appeared, their uniforms suddenly seeming more official, their stances more rigid. They cleared the hallways, directing staff and the few lingering visitors with curt, professional gestures. Alara watched as Dr. Finch emerged from his office, his face alight with a kind of predatory excitement. A high-profile military patient was a chance for glory, a feather in his cap, a story to be told at fundraisers. The helicopter's distinctive whump, whump, whump grew from a distant throb to a building-shaking roar. Alara felt the vibration in the soles of her shoes, a familiar rhythm that plucked a chord deep in her memory. She found herself moving toward the trauma bay entrance, drawn by an instinct she thought she had suppressed. The gurney burst through the doors, a whirlwind of paramedics, flight nurses, and 2 stone-faced men in dark suits who were clearly not medical personnel. They moved with an unnerving economy of motion, their eyes scanning everything, their hands never far from the subtle bulges under their jackets. On the gurney was a man, or what was left of one. He was encased in a web of tubes, wires, and blood-soaked bandages. His face was a contorted mask of pain, his skin pale and clammy under the harsh fluorescent lights. But his eyes were open, and they were blazing with a defiant, furious light. Finch stepped forward, radiating authority. "I'm Dr. Finch, Chief of Surgery. Get him to Trauma 1. Give me a full report, now." As they rushed the gurney past, the man's eyes met Alara's for a fraction of a second. It was just a glance, but it was enough. She saw past the pain, past the agony. She saw something she recognized with a chilling certainty. It was the look of a hunted animal, a soldier deep in enemy territory who knew, with every fiber of his being, that he was surrounded by hostiles. He didn't trust a single face in the room. The doors to Trauma 1 swung shut, and the circus began. Finch was in his element, barking orders, demanding stats, preening for the benefit of the quiet men in suits. But from inside the room, Alara could hear a voice, ragged and weak but laced with steel. "No, get away from me. No surgeons." The patient was refusing treatment. The tension on the floor ratcheted up to an unbearable level. A critically injured soldier, a VIP of the highest priority, was actively fighting the people trying to save his life. Finch's voice, usually so smooth and controlled, became sharp and laced with frustration. He emerged from the trauma room a few minutes later, his face a thundercloud. "He's delirious, but he's strong as an ox," Finch snarled to one of the suits. "He's refusing all intervention. We need to sedate him, or he'll bleed out on my table." The suit, a man with a jawline that looked like it was carved from granite, shook his head slowly. "Negative, Doctor. The asset remains conscious. Those are our standing orders, non-negotiable." "Standing orders?" Finch's voice rose, incredulous. "I'm the chief of surgery here. That man will die if I don't operate. Your orders don't supersede my medical judgment." "They do," the suit replied, his voice flat and final. He was a human shield made of silence and authority. Finch was trapped. His ego, his authority, his chance at glory, all being thwarted by a wounded man on a gurney and a glorified bodyguard. He paced the hallway, a caged tiger, radiating impotent fury. He needed someone to blame, someone to punish. His eyes swept the floor and landed on Alara. "You," he snapped, pointing a finger at her. "Get in there. Monitor his vitals every 5 minutes. Call me the second he loses consciousness. Do not touch him. Do not speak to him. Just watch him. Is that clear?" It was a demeaning task, a job for a junior nurse or an aide. He was making her a glorified spectator to a man's potential death, a punishment for her earlier perceived insubordination. "Perfectly clear, Doctor," Alara said, her voice betraying no emotion. She pushed open the door to Trauma 1 and stepped inside. The room was cold. The symphony of beeps from the monitors was erratic, a frantic, syncopated rhythm of a body in crisis. The two suits stood like statues in the corners of the room. The flight nurses had stepped back, leaving a perimeter around the gurney, and in the center of it all was the soldier. He was watching her, his eyes narrowed slits of suspicion. His left arm was a mangled ruin of bandages, and a dark, ugly stain was spreading across the dressing on his abdomen. His breathing was shallow and rapid. He was losing the fight. Alara moved to the monitors, her back to him, giving him space. She didn't look at him directly. She knew that a direct gaze could be perceived as a threat. Instead, she focused on the numbers, the waveforms, the story the machines were telling her. Tachycardic, hypotensive. His pressure was dropping steadily. He didn't have much time. She observed him in her peripheral vision. He was young, maybe late 20s. His hair was matted with sweat and dirt. His knuckles were raw and bloody, as if he'd been punching something, or someone. And on the inside of his right wrist, peeking out from under the strap of a medical tag, was a tattoo. It was faded and small, a simple design she almost missed. A stylized griffin, its wings unfurled, clutching a trident. Alara's breath caught in her throat. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, painful beat. The sterile, cold air of the trauma room vanished, replaced by the memory of hot, dusty wind and the smell of cordite. Task Force Griffin. Her unit. The ghosts. The men and women whose names were not on any official roster, who went to the places that didn't exist on any map. She had been their medic, their echo, the one who put them back together in the dark. This man wasn't just any soldier, he was one of hers. A new wave of chaos erupted as Finch stormed back into the room, his patience completely gone. "That's it, I'm taking him. His pressure is critical. I will not lose a patient in my hospital because of some bureaucratic nonsense." He advanced toward the gurney, a syringe in his hand. "A powerful sedative. This will calm him down." The soldier tried to push himself up, a guttural roar of defiance tearing from his throat. "No, stay back!" His body convulsed, and the cardiac monitor screamed a high, piercing alarm. V-TAC. His heart was beating itself to death. The suits moved forward, but Finch waved them off. "He's crashing! Get out of my way!" This was it. The point of no return. Alara felt the world slow down, the frantic beeping of the monitor becoming a dull, steady pulse in her ears. She saw Finch's hand reaching for the IV port. She saw the soldier's eyes, wide with not just pain but sheer terror. He wasn't afraid of dying. He was afraid of them. She moved. She didn't think. She acted. Years of training took over, muscle memory and instinct honed in the crucible of combat. She stepped between Finch and the gurney, a small woman in blue scrubs forming an impossible barrier. "Get out of my way, nurse!" Finch snarled, his face inches from hers. "No," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the noise of the room like a shard of glass. She turned her back on the chief of surgery, a move of such profound insubordination that the entire room seemed to hold its breath. She leaned over the soldier, placing a calming hand on his uninjured shoulder. She brought her face close to his ear, shielding her words from the others. She spoke the words, the old words, the ones that meant I am one of you, you are not alone. "Whiskey Hotel on the wire," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "The Griffin flies at midnight." The soldier's struggling ceased. His entire body went rigid. The wild, terrified look in his eyes sharpened into something else, disbelief, shock, and a dawning, desperate hope. His gaze locked onto hers, searching, questioning. His voice was a dry, rasping whisper, a test. "Who holds the trident?" It was the countersign. The question only a griffin would know to ask. "Echo does," she replied, her voice steady. "And she always brings her children home." A single tear tracked a clean path through the grime on his cheek. The fight went out of him, replaced by a profound, shuddering relief. His hand, the one that wasn't mangled, shot out and gripped her arm with surprising strength. "Echo," he breathed, the name a prayer. "It's you. Only you. I trust you." The cardiac monitor, as if by a miracle, began to settle. The deadly rhythm broke, returning to a rapid but more stable sinus tachycardia. The screaming alarm fell silent. The silence that followed was absolute. Dr. Finch stood frozen, the syringe still in his hand, his face a mask of utter bewilderment and incandescent rage. The two suits exchanged a look of stunned comprehension. They didn't understand the words, but they understood the result. This nurse, this quiet, invisible woman, had done what no one else could. She had reached him. "What is this?" Finch finally sputtered, his voice trembling with fury. "What did you do? I'm ordering you to step aside. Security, remove this nurse." But before anyone could move, the soldier, still gripping Alara's arm, spoke again, his voice stronger now, filled with a new and absolute conviction. "She stays," he commanded, his eyes fixed on Finch with pure hatred. You get out, now!" One of the suits stepped forward, placing a firm hand on Finch's shoulder. "Doctor, I suggest you do as he says." The man's voice was polite, but his grip was iron, and the message was unmistakable. Defeated and publicly humiliated by a nurse and his own patient, Finch looked as if he might actually explode. He shot Alara a look of such venomous promise that it made the air crackle. Then he turned on his heel and stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. Alara didn't watch him go. Her attention was solely on the man on the gurney. The soldier. Her soldier. "All right," she said, her voice shifting. The nurse was gone. Echo was here. Her tone was calm, clipped, and filled with an authority that no one in the room dared to question. "What's your name, trooper?" "Cutter," he gasped out. "Sergeant Kyle Cutter Jensen." "Okay, Cutter, I'm going to keep you alive, but you have to work with me. I need to know exactly what's wrong, and you need to let me help you." Her hands were already moving, assessing. She checked his pupils, ran her fingers along his neck to check for spinal injury, her touch sure and practiced. They said you were out," Cutter whispered, his eyes still locked on her face. "Said you went civilian." "I did," she said, not missing a beat as she grabbed a fresh pack of gauze and began applying pressure to the abdominal wound. "Doesn't mean I forgot how to do my job. Talk to me, Cutter. Mechanism of injury." The medical jargon, the field terminology, it was their language. It focused him. "IED, fragmentation. My vest. It failed. Piece of shrapnel. In my gut. Arms busted up bad. Left leg. Can't feel it." Alara's mind raced. Abdominal wound, likely internal bleeding. The failed vest was a critical piece of information. The numbness in his leg could be a transected artery or a spinal injury. She was working against the clock. "Okay, we need to get that pressure up. I'm starting another line." She moved with an efficiency that was breathtaking. The other nurses in the room, who had been frozen in shock, now moved to help her, their actions spurred by her quiet confidence. She didn't raise her voice. She gave calm, direct orders, and they were followed without question. Start a dopamine drip. Get whole blood O negative now. Page neuro and ortho for consults, but tell them they are on standby. She was a conductor leading an orchestra, and the music was the art of saving a life. The two suits watched her, their faces unreadable, but their postures subtly relaxed. They had found the one person on the planet their asset trusted, and they were letting her work. They recognized the quiet, lethal competence of a fellow professional. Just as she finished securing the new IV line, the door to the trauma room opened again. It wasn't Finch this time. The man who entered was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing the uniform of a 3-star general. His face was a roadmap of hard-won battles and sleepless nights. He carried an aura of absolute, unshakable command. The air in the room seemed to solidify. The suit snapped to attention. This was General Marcus Thorne. Finch scurried in behind him, his face a mixture of sycophantic deference and simmering rage. "General, my deepest apologies for this situation. We have an insubordinate nurse who has interfered with patient care. I was just about to—" General Thorne held up a hand, silencing Finch with a single, effortless gesture. He didn't even look at the surgeon. His eyes, sharp and intelligent, swept the room, taking in the scene, the stabilized monitors, the new IV bags, and the quiet nurse working on his wounded soldier. His gaze settled on Alara. He saw the way she worked, the confidence in her hands, the calm command in her posture. He saw the way Cutter, his soldier, was watching her, his trust absolute. "Report," Thorne said, his voice a low rumble. The command was directed at Alara. She didn't pause in her work. "General, Sergeant Jensen, multiple GSWs and fragmentation injuries secondary to an IED, primary blast injury to the abdomen, compromised body armor, compound fracture to the left humerus, suspected spinal involvement, loss of sensation in the left leg. Vitals were unstable. Brief run of V-TAC, but he's stabilized for now. He needs blood, and he needs an operating room yesterday." The report was perfect, concise, military grade, no wasted words. Thorne's eyebrows rose slightly. He looked from Alara to Cutter, then back. He saw the griffin tattoo on Cutter's wrist. He was a man who missed nothing. Sergeant Jensen was refusing treatment. "He was refusing Dr. Finch, sir," Alara corrected, her voice still level. "He has agreed to let me coordinate his care." Finch made a strangled sound of protest. "General, this is absurd. She's a nurse." Thorne finally turned his head and fixed Finch with a look so cold it could have frozen helium. "And you, doctor, are the chief of surgery who is about to lose my soldier. Be silent." Finch's mouth snapped shut. His face went pale. Thorne stepped closer to the gurney, his eyes back on Alara. "I was told the sergeant responded to a specific phrase. A code. How would a civilian nurse come to know a task force Griffin recognition signal?" It was the question, the one that would pull her out of the shadows for good. She met his gaze directly, her own eyes clear and steady. "I wasn't always a civilian nurse, General," she said quietly. "Call sign Echo, Combat Medic, Task Force Griffin, 2012 to 2016. A flicker of recognition crossed Thorne's face, followed by a look of profound understanding. He remembered the file, a legendary medic, decorated for valor, who had vanished from the service after a particularly brutal operation in the Hindu Kush. Her entire team had been wiped out. She was the sole survivor. The official record said she'd resigned her commission. The unofficial whispers said she'd been broken by it. He looked at her now, at the unbreakable calm and the steely competence. She wasn't broken. She had just gone to ground. "Vance," Thorne said, the name clicking into place. "I should have known you were with Razor Team." "Yes, sir," she said. A shadow of pain crossed her face, so fleeting it was almost invisible, but he saw it. "It's a damn good thing you're here, Vance," Thorne said, his tone shifting from inquisitive to commanding. He turned to Cutter. "Son, what's going on? Why did you refuse treatment? Why him?" He jabbed a thumb toward Finch. Cutter's eyes, which had been focused on Alara, shifted to the general, then to Finch. The hatred in them was a palpable force. "Sir," he began, his voice raspy but clear. "The vest, the new ceramic plates. They told us it was next gen, lighter, stronger. It's crap, sir. It's paper. The shrapnel went through it like it wasn't even there. 3 of my men, 3 of them are dead because their armor failed." A heavy silence fell over the room. The implications of his words were staggering. Defective equipment, dead soldiers. How do you know this? Thorne's voice was dangerously quiet. Because I heard them, sir, Cutter said, his hand tightening on Alara's arm. During the firefight, after the blast, I was down, playing dead. Two of the local contractors we hired for security, they were talking. They weren't supposed to be on that frequency. They thought we were all dead. They were talking about the shipment, about how the plates were cheap knockoffs from a Chinese factory, that the profit margin was huge. Alara felt a cold dread seep into her bones. This was bigger than a medical emergency. This was treason. And they mentioned a name, sir, Cutter continued, his eyes burning into Dr. Finch, who was now sweating profusely, his expensive suit looking wilted and cheap. Their American contact, the man who fast-tracked the procurement contracts, who faked the quality control tests, the man getting the biggest payout. Cutter took a ragged breath, his voice dropping to a low, venomous growl. They called him the Finch. The world stopped. Every eye in the room swiveled to Dr. Alistair Finch. He stood frozen, his face the color of ash. The arrogant smirk, the condescending posture, it all dissolved in an instant, replaced by the raw, naked panic of a man who had just heard his own death sentence read aloud. That's a lie, he stammered, his voice a high-pitched squeak. It's preposterous, the ravings of a delirious man. General, you can't possibly— I can, Thorne interrupted, his voice like the cracking of a glacier. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. This is Thorne. I'm invoking Protocol Damocles. Yes, right now. I have the final piece. Lock this hospital down, no one in or out. I want a full forensic accounting team at St. Jude's in 30 minutes. And send me a custodial team. We have a traitor in custody. He snapped the phone shut and turned his full attention to Finch. The surgeon looked like he was about to faint. He backed away, stumbling into a medical cart, sending instruments clattering to the floor. You can't do this. I'm a civilian. You have no jurisdiction, Finch shrieked, his composure utterly shattered. For selling defective armor to my soldiers, resulting in their deaths. Thorne took a slow, deliberate step toward him. For treason? Doctor, my jurisdiction is anywhere on this planet I decide it is. You are a threat to national security, and your long, profitable career has just come to a very abrupt end. Two more men entered the room. They were not dressed in suits. They were in military police uniforms, their sidearms holstered, their expressions grim. They flanked Finch, their presence immense and intimidating. Finch looked around wildly, his eyes pleading. He looked at the other nurses, the residents, the people he had terrorized for years. He found no sympathy. He saw only cold, hard stares. He had ruled by fear, and now, in his moment of need, he had no allies. His gaze fell on Alara. You, he hissed, his face contorted with hate. You did this. Alara met his gaze without flinching. No, doctor, she said, her voice calm and even. You did. The MPs took his arms. They didn't use force. They didn't have to. The fight was gone. Dr. Alistair Finch, the god of St. Jude's, was led away, his expensive shoes scuffing on the floor, his head bowed in utter defeat. The doors swung shut behind him, and he was gone. The aftermath was a strange, suspended moment of quiet disbelief. The monster was gone. The immediate threat to Cutter's life had been a man in a suit, not the metal in his gut. If you were Alara, standing in that room, having just exposed a conspiracy that reached the highest levels, would you feel fear? Or would you feel the cold, satisfying thrill of justice finally being served? Thorne broke the silence. He turned to Alara, his expression one of deep, profound respect. Vance, you just saved more lives than you know. We've been investigating this supply company, Aegis Dynamics, for months. We knew there was a leak, someone on the inside pushing through their contracts. We just couldn't find him. You just handed him to us on a silver platter. I was just doing my job, sir, she said, her attention already back on Cutter. And my job right now is to get this soldier to an OR. Assemble your team, Thorne commanded. Anyone you trust, the best in this hospital. I want them in OR, 3 in 10 minutes. My men will secure the entire floor. No one gets near him without your explicit approval. It was an unprecedented transfer of authority. He wasn't just trusting her. He was putting her in command. For the first time in a long time, Alara felt a flicker of the person she used to be. The leader. Echo. She looked at the nurses who were staring at her with newfound awe. "You heard the general?" she said, her voice ringing with an authority they had never heard from her before. "Let's go to work." The next 2 hours were a blur of controlled, purposeful action. Alara handpicked the surgical team. Dr. Eris Thorne, a brilliant but unassuming trauma surgeon Finch had consistently overlooked for promotion. A veteran anesthesiologist named Cole, and 2 of the most competent surgical nurses on staff. They worked together seamlessly, a well-oiled machine under Alara's watchful eye. She didn't scrub in, but she ran the room, coordinating, anticipating, a field medic in her natural element. They removed the shrapnel, repaired the perforated bowel, and stabilized the internal bleeding. The arm was a mess of shattered bone, but the orthopedic surgeon was able to set it. The news from the neurosurgeon was the best they could have hoped for. The numbness in the leg was due to a severely bruised but not severed spinal nerve. With time and physical therapy, Cutter would likely walk again. When he was wheeled into the recovery ICU, stable and resting, Alara finally allowed herself to feel the bone-deep exhaustion. She had been running on adrenaline for hours. She leaned against a wall in the hallway, the familiar hospital smells now seeming different, less oppressive. The air felt cleaner. The hospital was buzzing with the news. Dr. Finch arrested, military police everywhere, and the quiet night nurse, Nurse Vance, was at the center of it all. People looked at her differently as she walked down the hall. The whispers that followed her were no longer about her aloofness, but about her heroism. They were filled with awe and a touch of fear. She was no longer invisible. General Thorne found her by the nursing station, the very spot where Finch had humiliated her just hours before. The place seemed like a relic from another lifetime. "He's stable," she reported before he could ask. "Prognosis is good. He's a fighter." "They're all fighters," Thorne said, his voice softer now. "That's why we recruit them. But they need people like you to put them back together when they break." He paused, studying her face. "Finch is singing like a canary. He's given up the entire network. Aegis Dynamics is being dismantled as we speak. Arrests are being made at the highest levels of the Pentagon's procurement office. The rot was deep, Vance. You lanced a boil that was poisoning the whole system." Alara just nodded, absorbing the information. It was a victory, a huge one, but she felt no elation. Only a quiet, grim satisfaction. Justice had been done. Men wouldn't die because of faulty armor anymore. That was what mattered. "We lost a damn fine operator when you left the service," Thorne continued. "The official report on Razor Team's last op was heavily redacted. I read the original. I know what happened. I know what you did. You held off an enemy platoon for 3 hours alone, protecting your wounded until extraction arrived. You should have received the Medal of Honor for that." "The only medal I wanted was to bring my team home," she said, her voice thick with emotion for the first time. "I failed." "No," Thorne said, his voice firm. "You survived. And your skills are too valuable to be wasted changing IV bags and taking orders from arrogant fools like Finch. I came here tonight to save one soldier, but I think I found another one." He looked her straight in the eye. "I'm creating a new position, a special liaison role attached to my command, a medical consultant for all special operations cases. You'd have full autonomy. You'd be responsible for overseeing the care of our most critical assets. Both stateside and abroad. You'd answer to no one but me. It's not a request, Vance. It's a recruitment." Alara was stunned into silence. He was offering her a way back, not to the field, not to the firefights and the dust, but to the mission of taking care of the soldiers. It was everything she had ever wanted, a purpose she thought she had lost forever in the mountains of Afghanistan. A cage of her own paranoia and grief had been her home for 3 years. He was handing her the key. She looked down at her blue scrubs, stained with a hero's blood. She thought of Finch's sneering face, telling her she would always be a follower. She thought of Cutter's hand gripping her arm, his voice whispering her call sign like a prayer. She looked up at the general, and for the first time in years, she let a small, genuine smile touch her lips. "When do I start?" A week later, Alara Vance walked through the main doors of a St. Jude's Metropolitan Hospital for the last time. She wasn't wearing scrubs. She was dressed in a sharp, dark pantsuit that fit her like a second skin. Her hair was pulled back in a neat, professional bun. She looked taller, more confident. She was no longer a ghost. She carried a small box with her personal effects from her locker. On her way out, she passed the surgical wing's main office. The nameplate on the door, Dr. Alistair Finch, Chief of Surgery, had been removed, leaving a faint, discolored rectangle on the wall. A new, temporary name was already in its place. Dr. Eris Thorne, Acting Chief. Her last stop was the recovery ICU. She stood outside the glass door of Cutter's room. He was awake, sitting up in bed talking to a physical therapist. He saw her and broke into a wide grin, giving her a sharp, enthusiastic thumbs up. She returned the gesture with a small, respectful nod. Her work here was done. As she turned to leave, she saw the looks from her former colleagues. The awe, the respect. They saw her now. They finally saw the person who had been there all along, hidden in plain sight. A black sedan was waiting for her at the curb. One of General Thorne's men, the stoic suit from the trauma room, got out and opened the rear door for her. As she slid into the leather seat, she took one last look at the hospital, the sterile brick building that had been both her prison and her proving ground. She hadn't been looking for a fight. She'd been hiding from the war. But the war had found her, as it always does. And in the crucible of that one long night, she had rediscovered not the soldier she had been, but the leader she was always meant to be. The car pulled away from the curb, merging into the traffic, carrying Echo away from the ghosts of her past and toward the future of her mission. She was finally going home. Paragraph. Thank you for joining us for this story. If you believe in the power of quiet competence and the courage to stand up to corruption, please hit that subscribe button. Your support is what allows us to keep bringing these stories of unsung heroes to life. We'd love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever had a moment where you had to reveal a hidden skill or stand up to an authority figure you knew was wrong? Share your story with us below. And don't go anywhere. The next story is loaded and ready to play. It's a gripping tale of a librarian who uncovers a town's darkest secret, and you won't want to miss it.